Good day, everyone. Welcome to the Wardroom Live. I'm excited. Today we're going to be talking about automation. Automation for industries. Every industry is on the cutting edge of a technological revolution, even more so than we have been in the previous past. And what that means is technological revolution in automation. Now, this spans all industries and probably is going to be more of something that we're kind of used to seeing nowadays, but on a much grander scale. When I say we see nowadays, we have companies like Uber who use, who basically have an automated taxi service that empowers humans to, make it easier for transportation to get around, right? You see this in stores that have automated checkouts where there's obviously less people that the store needs to hire, and the shopper, the consumer, goes and checks themselves out. So when we're talking about automation, we're talking about enabling technologies, not just for machines on production lines, but also for machines in computer systems. So we're really talking about the future of getting automation to a grander scale, and that leads to actually job displacement. So that's the real talking point. If you hear it on the news when they're talking about automation and jobs, they're talking about future ability or future displacement of workers. So it's important that we're following and tracking these trends in technology and how humans are enabling the technology that's coming out, as far as mobile technology, AI-driven software for customer service, AI-driven data that's already set up from a third-party service that entrepreneurs use to make their operations more feasible and cost effective. So this spans many topics, and we're not going to be able to hit every certain point because we could spend 8 hours talking about automation and every single type of industry. But it really holds no bounds. It's we're talking about healthcare, we're talking about banking, we're talking about energy, we're talking about the way people use cellular technology. We're talking about all sorts of things kind of bunched into one category, which is automation. So we're going to try not to be so broad in our discussion today, but it's also kind of double-edged sword that if we're just speaking in hypothetical terms for automation, it really spans many industries. So just be aware of that. Ultimately, the market decides. We still have the free market in the United States, at least. So the market really decides, based on supply and demand of products, where the jobs are going to be. So we can track trends by tracking the market, tracking people's behaviors and what they do. And we can kind of get a glimpse at what the future may look like, but it's pure speculation. So we won't know until these type of automated technologies roll out into full service and production, or into full apps or applications as a service, to really measure the effective change and job losses, job creation, and how society reacts to those factors. So without further ado, my co-host, Mr. Mike, is pretty much, I'm going to rely on him this episode for subject matter expertise in this area, and I'm going to come at it from a economist point of view. So,
all right. Well, thank you for having me again.
Sure.
These conversations are always fun, especially on Sunday morning at 9 a.m. So
yeah.
let's do it. What do you have for me today?
Basically, the future is here now. Right? We have this technology here now. And what does it mean? what does it look like when that technology gets more distributed out and in service and operation? What do you think we can expect from automation in job displacement and job creation?
Well, there's actually a couple things we could look at. We could look to history as we know it. We could look to some of the short-term changes that we've seen so far. And then, honestly, the rest of it is kind of building scenarios and doing prediction. And I think our conversations about things like capitalism. Capitalism works in a way where we know what's happening with the world, but as soon as things change, does that follow, right? Like, does that kind of system follow? And so, like, we need to just start thinking about all of these things in the future and building scenarios, not just from the perspective of sci-fi doom and gloom, right? But automation can be great, right? It's not just Terminator. So, the first thing I would do is look back to every industrial revolution. You got the Industrial Revolution, of course, the Green Revolution, and most recently the Digital Revolution, which has brought the online age and changed many of the ways we do tasks, from calculating to word processing, right? A lot of those things were done by people, and now they're not. So where did they go, right? I think a lot of people have reserves about automation because they're like, I'm going to lose my job. But there's a conundrum, I think, because we're actually seeing that if you compared us to 100 years ago, and obviously there's more people, but there's also more jobs. They're just not the same jobs, right? Like, if at one point 80% of America was doing agriculture, and now we're down to like 2%.
Greater than 40%.
40%?
Yeah.
Okay, and now we're down to 2% entirely.
Yeah.
What does that say? Where did those people go? They still have jobs, I assume.
Yeah.
We're only at 3%, 4% unemployment, so it's pretty good.
Yeah.
I would start there. What has happened? And I think, have we done a good job with making those shifts? Arguably, we have, but then in some cases, right, like maybe history wasn't recorded in the best of ways. Do we know exactly what happened? Were people able to just retrain and move on?
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah. As long as you're not talking about some big socioeconomic event like the Great Depression, I think it's safe to say, at least, that people over time, over a long time, they retrained and found work somewhere. They went from being maybe productive in an agriculture or agrarian type of society, but we're talking about 40 or 50 years from just solely leaving that style of economic prowess in the United States into a more industrialized revolution, right?
And that's a good point. So in that case, as people moved away from farms and moved towards cities where the jobs were now, we had the industrialization going on, people moving to factories. What did companies do at that point in time? And I think you'll find that a lot of companies were training people, not necessarily educating through a formal education system, but training people to do specific tasks within their company. Ford's a great example. They brought up the manufacturing line, right, assembly line, and they trained people to work on these lines because it was something that had never been done before. It's not something that was taught in school.
Yeah.
And so they got formal education through their companies to accomplish tasks. And, that's why many workers up in the Michigan area still hold companies like Ford in great respect, because they provided them a lifestyle, an entire lifestyle. They trained them, they gave them jobs, they gave them houses, right? They were able to live the American dream right there in the Midwest. And I don't know if that's happening now, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's happening in the future.
Yeah. I guess that's where we get to machines enable productivity. It's work productivity. That's the factor in companies that invest in these technologies, and they bring them online, they're doing so for productivity to keep costs down. So workers have to find other work, and there's going to be a percentage of the population that adapts. Humans are, highly adaptable, right?
I think so, yeah.
But there's going to be a percentage of the population that falls into disparity. So it becomes a point, I think, for people to re-educate themselves, and this is a big talking point with the skills gap, right? But we're going to see that even more so, and we see it already for like programming language. Like there's a huge programming language skills gap, and it's not necessarily being filled for people inside the United States. It's being filled with people coming into the United States that learn these, or coming out of the university system, but they're very specialized, and it's hard to really nail an entry-level skills position to the actual gap that's supposedly being filled. So one thing I want to ask is, what is, from, I guess, maybe a short-term perspective or maybe a historical reference, people that have been displaced by these advances in technology, and what did that necessarily look like for them compared to people that were, made the adaptable changes to give themselves a leg up in the next wave of society?
Well,
just comparing those two.
Yeah,
people.
just looking at these, we're seeing it right now, and it's calls for systematic change. Now, since the beginning of time, people have always called for systematic change, but it's more exacerbated when people lose their jobs, right?
Yeah.
Or people are on the brink of losing their jobs. So we're at a point, right, where and I want to be clear about what is being automated. We're losing so many jobs to automation, or will be in the near future. And so, like, what is automation even capable of? We're talking about automating away lawyer positions, right? Because any job that has a high, dense collective volume of information that needs to be processed and also formatted in a very particular way can be automated. And so people are taking law and turning it into automated procedures. But I think one that a lot of policymakers are very concerned about right now, because 3.5 million jobs are actually in the truck industry. Yeah. And look at Walmart right now. They're trying to put autonomous trucks on the road, and basically if something goes wrong, somebody will be able to reach in from a remote location and kind of take control of the wheel. But there will still be, I guess, driving jobs, but are those guys going to, and women, are those guys and women going to find new jobs this late in life? I think the average age of the trucker is like 55 or something.
Right.
And so
they're not being replaced.
Where do they go from there, right?
Yeah.
Which was, I think, the original question. Well, they go on social programs.
Unfortunately,
if they have not necessarily collected a nest egg big enough for them to retire, they're going to go to more odd jobs. And don't get me wrong, I don't think the entire trucking industry, those people that are in the trucking industry right now, are just going to straight lose their jobs across the board, and we're going to lose literally 3.5 million jobs in one fell swoop. There's a lot of infrastructure change that needs to happen.
Yeah.
We'll see a lot more purchase, but logistics in general I think these truck drivers will turn to more individual transaction type approaches. They'll no longer have big contracts for year-long endeavors. And I think their stability in life becomes a lot more shaky, right?
Yeah.
And so, do they retrain? I don't think so. I don't think they do.
Yeah, and you see that too with customer service.
Yeah.
And there's, millions, I don't know the exact number of customer service reps in the United States that just run that just run telephone service, answering services for companies, whether they're third party or the internal companies. actual human interaction. That's going away, and that's going to be replaced with technologies like IBM Watson or Siri, voice enabled, completely automated interaction with an interface. Basically, is what it is. So those jobs are going to go away, and what do those people do? Now, I know it's pure speculation, and I don't mean to set you up for what exactly is going to happen, but there's going to be a percentage of those displaced workers that are going to adapt, right? And they're going to be able to educate themselves, hopefully in a manner that's cost effective for them to go and fill a more highly specialized role. And truckers is a great example because they're aging, and millennials don't necessarily want to be truckers. They want the machines to be the trucker. So it's over the course of time, the displaced worker that finds themselves in a disparity will have a much harder time if they don't retrain themselves and adapt to the job market. So I think that small percentage that does adapt obviously is going to be much more better off. They're going to have employment over the long run, and they're going to be able to fulfill, their career. But the larger percentage that doesn't retrain themselves or adapt to conditions or become more specialized, they're the statistic that politicians are talking about with automation. That's what they're kind of really inducing a fear into the market, but it's very real. So how far does that go? Does that trickle throughout the economy? It's
you kind of bring up a I think a really good point. In that this is probably not an economic issue, right? Yeah. Because there are these things happening all the time. People lose their jobs, they retrain for another on a micro level, right? Not necessarily on such a huge macro level where we're seeing entire industries change in the blink of an eye, but we see it in our local communities. One job is replaced by one machine, let's say, or 3 jobs is replaced by one machine. And so with that being said, though, it is a political issue, right? Very much a political issue, because we're talking about real people's lives. And we're talking about the fact that America, to a large degree, is democratic. And so as people lose their jobs, they're going to be the ones petitioning and picketing Congress and their local governments to try and make change. And I think for a lot of millennials, if we let them decide for us, right, what those changes are, we're not actually better preparing for the future, but we're trying to solve very minor issues now. Yeah. And so kind of where does this end up for us as far as automation is? You got to kind of think of like what skills can be automated, right?
Yeah, and I feel like the automation that's happened has been super low skill jobs that have been priced out of the market because it's more efficient to remove those, because they're usually large. Low skill jobs are usually larger in number, and when you replace it coming from a productivity standpoint, you're replacing it with something more efficient to offset the cost of those large number of people. Right? And it's not necessarily highly specialized. That's why I bring up the customer service rep example, because that's a lot of people answering calls that could be completely automated. Right?
It follows a specific line too, right? Like if you think of automation, you're taking a bunch of inputs, what those possible inputs could be, and you're trying to streamline it into an end result.
Yeah.
Like you said, it's done very well for low-skilled jobs. Hamburger flipper would be one. It is an assembly line for a hamburger, right? Yeah. You literally drop the bun, you throw the hamburger on the grill, that gets thrown on the bun, throw on the cheese, throw on the condiments, boom, that's pushed out. It's a process, it's steps that can be taken. And so anytime you can do that, somebody's going to figure out how to push that in a way where it can be automated. Amazon right now has all of these fulfillment centers around the nation, and logistics is one of the biggest industries to be hit by automation.
Yeah.
In my opinion, the only thing, and this is coming from an interview from one of the fulfillment center directors, was that these jobs that are being held at the fulfillment centers would probably be automated away if the robots were as dexterous as humans and could actually reach into bins with exact accuracy, like having fingers, and pull something out. As simple as that is, robots can't do it yet. So there's no need to fear that yet. But as soon as they figure it out, which I can guarantee somebody is working on, all those jobs are lost.
Yeah.
And I think it's more than just Amazon. Anywhere you go where you need to use your hands, that could go out the window.
Farming.
Right? Farming.
Like, especially when you're talking about picking, like picking strawberries or grapes, right? I mean, there's already machines that kind of do that, but the dexterity issue is getting the grapes without damaging them, because they have machines that agitate like grapevine plants and then kind of agitate, shake it off. But if we can, if there's a process that does less harm to those types of fruits, and get it with accuracy, you're going to see less, pickers working in the field, for example. And that's just kind of an old, real technology. But as soon as humans' hands can get replaced, like you said, I think that's going to hit a lot of industries hardcore. So,
like, I think, and I've seen this in a couple reports specifically by economists, what skills are useful in the future. It's critical thinking, right? Because, you can design a way of thinking, but you can't always think critically as a machine, right? Even though now we're coming out with these quantum supercomputers that are thinking in multiple different scenarios at the same time, I think for us to even understand what the heck that machine is talking about half the time might be something that, just think about it. Future jobs, they're going to exist, right? If you look back to
let's talk about youth and what their opportunities are going forward, because we hit the truck driver example, and people that are older, baby boomer generation, if they need to adapt or they're gonna die, that's kind of, as sad as that is to say, that's pretty much how it really is gonna be. But when these systems of automation come online for different types of industry, and then there's like not just a skills gap that needs to be filled to help run these types of machines, but also like youth unemployment, and how youth are going to be like, well, there's not those same jobs that there were 15 years ago. And then when they see that there's no opportunity for them, it creates like a civil instability, and it's almost like a spiral effect. So I think the question is how do we get these automated technologies online by doing the least amount of damage to the current job market, making it an ease and not necessarily a burden, as far as like, okay, we're online with these certain technologies, and they're gonna hit this industry all, like, tomorrow the hardest. Well, within 6 months, there's gonna be 1 million people unemployed. So I feel like
that is a tough question, because education isn't an overnight thing, right? I personally have gone through 18 years of it myself now, or 17 years, and it's wow, right? Like, if you need 17 years of your life to friggin' figure out how to do a singular field in the world, how are we going to be more adaptable to the job market?
I think education is coming around, catching up with not only just having skills gaps filled with these like non-university community centers, like the coding camps and stuff like that. So education's coming around to be able to fulfill need of society through demand for jobs, but I still see it as an outlet for young people to just go, because they don't have necessarily an exact idea of what they need to do. Plus, it's very much a corporate recruiting tool the university system is.
Right.
So how does education is huge to make sure that people are retraining themselves and adapting themselves to a job market that may not exist right now, but it will exist in 5 or 10 years. And how do we necessarily understand what that might look like without, being in the future already right now?
Listen, if you want an easy answer, the easy answer is, hey, pick up any coding language, learn to code in it. It will be relevant to your job, right?
Yeah.
I think that's the quickest, like, if you're really thinking that you're going to struggle here in the near future, figure out how to do it on a computer. Doesn't matter if it's art, doesn't matter if it's logistics, it doesn't matter if you're in the finance sector, it doesn't matter if you're in government, right? You can do it with a computer. Data is becoming more prevalent. Understanding how to use that data to better serve people is going to be the best use of it, right? And I think that's for people within companies too, right? That we hear a lot of times that it's about the bottom dollar or the bottom line and their profits, but no, they need customers. And I think there's a lot of information out there that say, hey, my customer is a very specific type of person.
Yeah.
And maybe we want to broaden that up. How do we do that? Well, we look at numbers that talk to a very specific group of people, right? Demographics. And then we kind of knit the two together and make a product or make a couple products that really speak to our customer base. And so really understanding those numbers and really understanding how to use computers and data, that's the number one, I think, just easy answer.
Right. I think companies are going to also obviously adapt because they're going to have to these changes that they're putting in place, but I feel like it's going to come from a customer-facing point of view and not necessarily a civil duty to make sure our workers are protected point of view. Although it kind of seems like that now because they don't want to be the company known for, replacing 30,000 people overnight. But I feel like, especially, and you'll see this like in like the Apple Store, for example, where it's about more a customer experience going into the Apple Store, and then the workers that work there aren't necessarily they're not highly skilled in sales, but they're highly skilled in solving the technology problems that people come into Apple stores for, rather simply. So there's more of a symbiotic relationship between jobs that are, still highly needed for consumeristic practices and customer facing, either whether it's retail or a service, and the ability for the worker to enable themselves, give them power to make that service more effective. And that's what Uber is. I mean, it's empowered humans to make, much more efficient driving and transportation taxi. That's really what it is. But it's empowered the workers to do it more efficiently, not just the technology. So there's a symbiotic relationship, and I think that's might be the biggest question. What does that real symbiotic relationship look like coming from a retrained worker perspective?
Yeah, and listen, I don't think every industry has a symbiotic relationship, right? There are certain jobs that will always have that symbiotic relationship. Like doctors will always be stronger with their AI and kind of machine tools that wouldn't allow them to do such precision surgery without it, right? Target very specific cells of cancer and like do their job. That is extremely symbiotic. The people rely on the tools and the tools rely on the expertise. And not just anybody can do that job. But think about the lower skill jobs which don't take a lot of training. Those are simply replacements or supplements, and instead of it comes down to companies, which one is cheaper, right? Is paying the minimum wage cheaper depending on where you're at, or is investing a lot in automation infrastructure right now going to be the better option? And listen, as long as I'm not here to bash Trump today, but listen, with the deal with Carrier, right, which had some factories in, what was it? Midwest somewhere, right?
Okay.
They were talking about moving to Mexico with their factory jobs, and he said, "No, we want to keep the jobs here." Okay, perfectly acceptable answer. We do want to keep the jobs here. But the way he handled it was that he gave them a large sum of money. We're talking about millions of dollars, 16 million, I believe.
Okay.
And that 16 million,
It's not that much for a big
no,
company,
no.
but
Sure. But it was meant to keep jobs, right?
Okay.
With the sole purpose of keeping jobs. 3 or 4 days later, this company says, "Hey, thanks for the money. We're going to spend it all on automation." Yes, the net result is still lost jobs.
yeah.
And so, do we put stipulations on money? I guess I'm not like saying that it wasn't done with good intent. It obviously was. We wanted to keep the jobs here. But, whether the jobs are in Mexico or whether the jobs are lost to automation, the only change is who benefits, right? And I think, carrier CEOs and shareholders, sure, they benefit. It keeps the money in the United States for and that's a good thing ultimately. But people still lost their job.
I mean, you've seen it with all sorts of politicians, and they try to do backdoor deals to create jobs and get jobs.
But none of them are economists.
No,
Right.
none of them might not understand, and they try to come through it with a political perspective or a business perspective if they're a business person and a politician. So, I mean, you saw that with Solyndra. I mean, that was a nightmare, and that was billions of dollars. So,
right.
It was we're going to create these jobs here in California by having this solar power plant, and what ends up happening, we spend all this money to do it, and then people just buy solar panels from China because it's more cost effective.
I mean,
I think that's where we draw the line as far as fiscal stimulus when we're talking about trying to keep jobs. We don't need to try to keep jobs. We need to get to the automation as fast as possible, but also retrain people into working with that automated practice.
Well, listen, let's stop using the stimulus for the companies and start using the stimulus for the retraining. And that's my only point, right?
Yeah.
And I think just how our country has moved away from organized labor unions, right, to a very contractor-esque type. It's very much a pay-for-service type work era.
It's like
where
a microeconomy,
right, where
micro-entrepreneur.
More and more people are doing like careers less and less, right?
That's a great point, too.
Yeah, you may do 5 or 6 jobs based on holding a certain set of skills for...
Right. No, that's a great point, too, for automation. It's about creating opportunity. Now, automation is thought of as this like fearful thing that's going to come and replace jobs, but if you use it as an opportunity tool, you can retrain yourself, and I think that it's created a micro-entrepreneur space, especially with technology, enabling ease of the internet that we have to create companies and, economies of scale the fastest and also to fail the fastest. So you can come up with an invention that people buy into, and they're like, oh, sweet, let's see if this works. And if it works, it's going to scale fast. If it doesn't work, it's going to fail fast. But to the point where jobs are being replaced and being lost completely, it opens up a whole new avenue if you're an opportunist to come into that technology revolution as a contractor, as an entrepreneur, as a piece worker, to really scale yourself with not necessarily the job opportunities might not be there as far as like an old paradigm corporate perspective, but they are there if you can see the opportunities that exist, make solutions, and then come up with, create a company that around whatever specialized skill set you have. But this also obviously takes an education perspective.
I think about it more and more. It's like, what skills can't the robots take from us? What makes us human? And honestly, it's just being social. Like we use social media, but I honestly, I'll see a report here or here that says we're less social or more social, right? You just need to be able to be social in many different ways, right? Take some of the things that you've learned in social media with regards to networking and apply it to conversations, and hold real strong relationships. Learn how to do this. Learn how to talk to people. A job I think that could hardly be taken from a human is being a comedian, right? Like, as silly as that sounds, I don't think robots right now or even in the near future can make a good joke, right?
Okay.
So because it's based off a human experience, right? These jokes are tailored to people because they've a lot of times gone through the same things. Robots will never feel that. So my point is, right, we need to take a more humanist approach. Technology is great. It makes our lives so much easier, and there will always be pros and cons to every technology that comes out. But at the end of the day, right, take a humanist approach first, and everything I think will fall into place afterwards, right? If we say, hey, automation is coming, and we're not talking about the immigrants, we're talking about the automation, which I think has hurt the Midwest more than anybody, right? It's not the Canadians coming down and taking your jobs, but it's the automation, right? Then real solutions can start to be formed, right? And so we could say, hey, you're not going into retirement. What kind of thing can we do for you in the near future? And personally, I don't know if this works, but I think we should really take a look at some sort of like universal income, just as a supplement, right? Because very much so, the jobs are just, they're there, but like, as an American, if we had a basic income every month, we wouldn't be worried about this, and we would actually be promoting entrepreneurship more than ever. We would be trying to fill some of the great jobs that can be realized but aren't realized because we're still living in an old system with new updates, kind of thing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not.
I'm a free market capitalist. I like when the market decides what we should do, and that market is based on human behavior.
Sure.
I think the biggest hang up for this whole thing is that people won't get properly re-educated to fulfill the new jobs that are coming in and in place of automation might take over this whole side of this industry. Great. Well, where are those people going to go? They need to be re-educated in a way to fit a skills gap, because there will always be high value skills. And if you don't adapt to the changes through the market, because the market's deciding whether you're a part of the decision or not. The market is deciding what societal changes are getting put in place, and you're a part of the market, but you don't necessarily have any decision factor. Your decision factor is, what can I do to retrain myself, to make myself more valuable to this type of industry that I have worked in, or maybe a new industry. So I feel like education is the key to this whole component, and we see it now with the skills gap. Like, look, you want a high-paying job? What are the skills that you really need in the United States right now? Like, you need to... I'm a prime example of this. You need to know how to, first, obviously, communicate with people, but second, you need to know data. Data is everything. Everything is data now. If you don't have your hands in data some way or some form, whether you're, understand the entry, understand the backdoor of systems and applications, or understand how data is stored and tracked and being used, like, you're behind the skills gap. And that's just one example. But there's, like, look at any places that are hiring. They want these highly specialized skills, and it adapts because technology is adapting. You have to adapt with the market demand for high-paying skilled workers and the services being rendered. That's not, you may be the fourth generation coal miner. Well, if coal mining goes away because people don't like coal because it's whatever for climate change activists. And society's like, we don't want to use coal anymore or fossil fuels, and we go into the dark ages. But you need to be able to have a whole slew of coal miners not be incentivized to be on unemployment, but to go and retrain themselves to get the jobs. Not necessarily may not be in their area. They're gonna have, and this is that burden of enabling technology that we've seen for the past 200 years. This isn't anything new. We've gone through a couple of different revolutions where technology, probably 250 years, right, in England. So, like, the displacement of workers, I don't think is such a scary thing. What's scary is those workers not being able to retrain themselves to the next 20 years.
And listen, I think a lot of the fear of re-education is that I'm going to spend all of this time retraining. Stop it. We don't have to go to university for everything. I say that as I'm currently doing a master's. I know you just completed a master's not too long ago, and I may even go further, right? But I like the space. I like understanding the research. I like analyzing things in a way that nobody's really looking at, and it maybe is not useful to the private sector, right? But at the same time, right, I get a lot of my information, I think, from tools that are online and available and cheap.
For free.
You mentioned data camps. That's even an expensive option for some, right?
Yeah.
Like, because you're talking about an immersive environment in which you're just doing data for anywhere from 2 to 8 weeks, and boom. Like, you're there every day just learning, and you really get a good grasp, but they, at the same time, there was actually a cool one that only took payment after you got a job, right?
Yeah.
And once you got a job, like, they would take based on how much salary you got. So it was like, it was a pretty interesting way of doing things. But at the same time, there are education opportunities out there, and they don't have to be 4 years, 2 years, right? They don't even have to be 6 months, right? Just do it in your free time at night, and start using your time more wisely instead of watching maybe all the television shows tell you how doomed we are, because we're not doomed. We're the most resilient species on the earth, right? Like, only one that's probably not in danger of being endangered. So,
yeah, that's for sure.
Except for climate change, like, I'm gonna take that seriously. But yeah, that's something that can be looked at,
Yeah, we did a whole show on climate change, but I feel like the real fact of the matter, brass tacks, when you break everything down for automation and future enablement of technology and machines and machine learning, is there's going to be a certain amount of people, and it's going to be more, that don't get the education. And we live in the age of information, so education is free to a certain extent. I mean, you might have to pay for, more information on that specific topic or case studies or something. But all the education at the university I went through, what did I use? I used Google, I used Khan Academy, I used YouTube, I used all these, these different free information service providers to help me better understand the curriculum and material. Now, education does force you to go into, a very structured environment, right? So, the education factor is key to enabling humans to adapt to the change if they're at threat of losing their job to automation. And I think that the university system understands this, but they're very much still a big business and they want to keep their numbers up, right? But at the same point in time, they have competition, like these boot camps, these community, more outreach type of programs to get people up to speed with the actual skills gap that are in the market now.
Yeah, what works for you? And, I want to touch on one more point before we...
Yeah.
I haven't looked to see if there's any questions yet, but before we answer questions or close out.
Yeah.
Keynes, I believe it was Keynes, said, the economist, said that we'd be down to like 14-hour work weeks by now, right?
Yeah.
According to what he was saying. That's not the case, right? Like we way back when were at 75-hour work weeks, and we've gradually gotten slower. We got to 40, and it kind of just stopped, right? Like, I'm a big promoter of like a 25-hour work week, but I very much think that automation could help us to be and have our own like things to do, right? Not just live in like this corporate world all the time, right? We should not. I think we're only super productive, maybe like 3 hours out of an entire day, right?
Yeah.
Like, and so why are we sitting there for 8 hours on end when those jobs can be automated? Like, I'll be honest, right?
Yes.
Give me more money for less time at work, and I think I'll be happy. Like, that's the direction we need to move in.
And more millennials are gonna do. Look, I work at a corporate environment. The average age is over 50.
Yeah.
I'm young. I'm a millennial there. There's like 4 young people, and there's like 100 people over 50, and it's very old paradigm style of corporate, job, corporate, job world, right? So the millennials, me and the 3 others, don't necessarily like it, and we're like, this needs to change, because if they don't change that environment, they're not going to be able to hire millennials, and then that whole business with inside the corporation will die. But that whole corporation will die. The corporations need to adapt, but they need to do it in a way that's more friendly. I'm talking about these old corporations that are in place. They've been in place for over 100 years, and they haven't changed anything since maybe hiring more women than since like 1950. It's literally this. Maybe they obviously have better processes and enable technology, but the same type of environment exists, and millennials don't want to work in that environment. So that's going to be a huge factor when we're talking about, yes, let's enable the technology to come online to automate these jobs and get these workers out of those positions, and then work on things that are important to them and becoming a micro entrepreneur.
Absolutely. I think we need to start more businesses. From the statistics I've read, and I think they're accurate, but I can't recall where I'm remembering it from, is that small businesses have been on the decline since the 70s. It's not that we're not creating more small businesses over time, but as a proportion of companies that exist, right, the number's getting smaller and smaller, right? And that's been happening since the 70s. That's 50 years. So look, we need to harder than ever push for new entrepreneurship, take over industries, not even industries, take over something that's really needed in your community, and make it widely available. Yes, you can scale it ultimately, but we need more people to just kind of give a shit about the place that they live in, and do the things that are necessary that they can do, right? Yeah. That are easy to accomplish.
Society's going to change in the market. The market's going to decide that's societal change based on people voting with their dollars, what they think is most important to them, what they're willing to spend their money on from a more moral and ethical perspective. And you see this with climate change, and I mentioned a week or two ago about like veganism, the rise of veganism. That's capitalism at its finest. I don't think people realize that. That's awareness, first of all. That's people want to do something better for their health. And you see companies being created out of that societal change, where people are like, I'm not going to eat meat. I'm going to eat vegetables. I'm going to have a more sustainable lifestyle. I'm going to have more of a moral and ethical compass to the way I live my life, and I'm going to vote with my dollars and decide on whether or not I want to buy these products or that product, or not this or that. So I believe that the free market will decide as long as we keep the incentivized programs to a minimum. If these jobs get lost and people are incentivized not to retrain themselves, like they get a stipend, universal basic income, they're gonna be like, oh sweet, $1,200 a month. I can live poor and not retrain myself to make, back to $60,000. It's an incentive program that promotes poverty more, I think, because of human behavior.
I mean,
than
that's
it does until...
that's one argument for it. But I am in one of those examples of people that is retraining with no money, and I would take that $12,000 in a year's time, and I would put it right back into my local economy, right, promoting small businesses within my area,
the liquor store.
And maybe
maybe not example,
you, but no, I would also probably set some money aside so that I have a few ideas of where I would like to start my own businesses, and I would take that cash, that free and clear cash, and put it right back into my own small business. So and listen, people 50 years ago were starting their small businesses with just $1,000 in hand, right? Think about what we could do if we just had a little bit more money. I'm saying, be open-minded about it, but I obviously that doesn't apply. That doesn't apply to everyone, but I can't say that if people have a more positive outlook on life, where they are given cash free and clear, that they're just going to go spend it on heroin, right? Like, that's that. Yeah. Certainly, there is a percentage of the population that will do that.
I like the idea of incentivizing those people to do something for that money. Like they have to create, specific, amount of productive hours in their community, or they have to have a business structure created and have it viably analyzed and see if it can work. So like I'm a huge proponent of taking the incentives away from the university system, because federal loans, government loans is all incentivized by the federal government to get people to go to afford the education. Why don't we incentivize small business ideas in place of, hey, you need to go to this old style paradigm that exists in corporatocracy America and have this traditional route. It doesn't even exist anymore, but people are still signing up to do it. And that's one thing I don't understand.
Right, and it's not just the business sector, it's government too. Like they're stuck in old world ideals, and they're not pushing forward. And this is, instead of just voting with your dollar, also fucking vote. I'm sorry for my language, but also vote, right? Because it is the one thing that we can do to elect people in our area that might actually get it, right? That aren't just like, oh yeah, well, we're going to promote tech because it's cool. I know that's a thing that they like to do in Phoenix. They're like, we want more tech companies to come here. Yeah. But, who does that really serve if they're bringing a bunch of server farms to Arizona because it's cheaper cost and it's great for their company? They're bringing people from outside of the state, and they only have 100 job slots available per company, and so it's like,
and then 90 of those job slots are fulfilled from the people that are moving the company. So it's only 10 people that are locally being effective.
Yeah, why'd you move to Phoenix? Is it just because it's cheap?
It's costs.
Yeah.
Energy costs are cheap.
But normally, and I think this was true, but about a lot of business development is you position yourself in a place where there's good skilled workers, right? So that you don't have to bring people from outside of the state. And you would think that they positioned here in Phoenix based on Arizona State being one of the largest colleges in the entire U.S., but that's not the case necessarily from what we've seen. So
look, I think this is a good segue into wrapping this thing up. Are there any questions by chance? I know we've not paid attention to questions.
The
last couple of weeks.
Yeah, I've been.
There's not great.
I didn't see any
because we're going on a little too long anyway.
No, we're fine.
So I think the main idea here in closing is that yes, innovation destroys jobs, but it also creates income for someone else. And what is that person that has newly created income gonna do? They're gonna go spend money and create, eventually trickling through the economy, they're gonna create new jobs. So it's a cycle. Innovation destroys jobs, creates income for people, small amount of people, yes, maybe, smaller than the group that had their jobs taken away from them, but that new income will then be spent into the society, into the economy again, and eventually create more jobs. That's the logical cycle, right? And there's a logical cycle gap. The gap is between the person who earned the money because of the automation and how long it takes for them to spend that wealth to create new jobs. That's the gap. And that logical cycle gap, we might not be able to rely solely on the private market to do it the way the system is, set up right now. Because education in these skilled areas takes a long time, and it's a lot longer than, as far as the way education is now, it's getting better, but it's a lot longer than how quick the technology is enabled in that specific sector of the economy. So that's where fiscal and monetary policy are supposed to step in and bail out people to get them retrained, relocated, up to speed on the highly skilled area that they wish to work in, and not incentivize them to be unemployed. Because that's what's probably the biggest detriment to society for automation, is not getting people into highly skilled areas that pay them the same, if not more, of the salary that they were making before the automation came and took their job. So what does that look like? And we touched on it here, I feel that it's a more micro economy. It's more morally, ethically driven services for people that live their lives accordingly. And it creates an opportunity, if you see it this way, an opportunity for those jobs that those people that got displaced to become an entrepreneur and a business owner. So that's the real trade-off here when we're talking about automation and job displacement, and then getting people retrained in more highly skilled areas that fulfill a skills gap based on the automation, or based on a new service or a new product or a new way that people want to live, and they need services within their market. So I see it only as a good thing. You're going to hear a lot of doom and gloom around automation, and I don't see it as a bad thing. People are changing the way they live their lives for generally a good reason. Like, they have some moral, ethical high ground that they want to stand on, and they want to be more, sustainable in their living standards. So with that societal change will push a change in the job market, push a change in the way we use technology, push a change in the way that society functions as a whole. And I feel like that this automation and enablement of future technologies and machines is a good thing. So I hope you believe it so, and you see it as an opportunity to change your life for the better and create more economic opportunity in your area. So that being said, that was the Wardroom Live for today. Come back next week. We're going to be talking about the future of health and healthcare. It's going to be another exciting topic, and we'll see you then. Thank you.